The waitress's tray hit the floor before anyone heard her gasp. Marcus Dutton's hand was still around her wrist when Dean Martin's voice stopped mid-note, and the entire room felt the silence land like a physical thing. Wait, because what Dean did in the next 4 minutes, with nothing but a microphone and a half-empty glass of whiskey, became the story that every Vegas insider whispered about for the next decade, and almost nobody understood what it cost him to do it. The Desert Palace showroom seated 412 people on a good night, and on the night of October 4th, 1963, every single seat was full. The dinner hour had come and gone. The tablecloths were littered with the pleasant wreckage of good meals, half-eaten desserts, wine glasses catching the stage light, cigarettes burning slow in crystal ashtrays. The room smelled of perfume and cigar smoke, and something electric, the particular charge that only builds when a great entertainer is exactly where he belongs. Dean Martin had been on stage for 40 minutes. He was into the part of the show the regulars loved most, the loose part, after the set list had become suggestion rather than scripture. When he'd work the room like a man wandering through his own living room, glass in hand, tie loosened just enough to signal that things were getting comfortable. He'd done 3 songs, told a joke about a priest and a poker dealer that made the front rows spray their drinks, and was currently midway through a slow velvet version of You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You that had the couples at the round tables leaning into each other without realizing it. The band was tight that night. Tommy Coletti on piano, doing the thing he did where his left hand barely moved, but somehow the rhythm filled every corner of the room. The brass section sat easy, breathing through the changes, listening to Dean the way musicians listen when the singer's really in it, not waiting for cues, just following. Notice something about the room in those minutes before everything changed. Look at table 7, 3rd row from the stage, center left. That's where Clint Eastwood was sitting. Notice something else while you're looking at that table, because the question everyone asks about what happened that night is what Dean did. Almost nobody asks the harder one. Why couldn't he look the other way? Clint was 23 months into what would become one of the more remarkable careers in Hollywood history, though nobody quite understood that yet in the autumn of 1963. He was known. The Western series had seen to that, but known still meant something manageable. He could walk into the Desert Palace without it becoming an event. He was there with 2 men from a studio he was in quiet negotiations with. Dinner before the show. Business mostly wrapped before Dean took the stage. Now he was settled in the way a man settles, when he's exactly where he wants to be. He'd seen Dean perform before. He knew what he was getting. What he hadn't planned for was the way the evening would turn. Marcus Dutton had been Clint's head of security for 11 months. 6 feet 5 inches. Close to 340 pounds. Former military. The kind of background that meant he'd been in places and situations that left marks you couldn't see unless you knew what you were looking at. He was good at his job. He was also, on this particular evening, 3 bourbons ahead of Clint, and somewhere past the point where careful judgment was running the show. He simply became, incrementally, more certain of himself, more settled into the conviction that his size and experience made him the most consequential man in any room he occupied. This is the first thing you need to understand about what happened next. Marcus wasn't a bad man, not fundamentally. He was a man who had learned, through years of hard experience, that size and force and the willingness to use both were the tools that solved problems. He'd been right about that in enough situations that it had calcified into certainty, and certainty, as Dean Martin could have told him, is the most dangerous thing a man can carry into a room full of other people. The waitress's name was Carol Ann Briggs, 22 years old, 18 months into her job at the Desert Palace, the kind of employee the floor manager always put on the premium tables because she had the quality most essential to that particular work. She never let you see her working. She moved through a crowded room, like she was barely there. Glasses and plates appearing and vanishing, as if the room itself was tending to you. She was good at it. She was professional about it. And she had the misfortune, at approximately 10:47 in the evening, of brushing Marcus Dutton's shoulder with her elbow while navigating the tight space between table 7 and the adjacent table, sending a small measure of bourbon, not even a full splash, a few drops onto his jacket sleeve. Dean had roughly 20 minutes left in the set. Look at what she does in the next 10 seconds. Because this is the exact moment everything starts. She apologized immediately. Quietly, professionally. The way you apologize in a premium showroom, when you know the error was minor, but the setting demands dignity. She reached for a cloth napkin. Marcus grabbed her wrist. Not violently, not with intention to harm, but firmly, in the reflexive way of a man who has spent years establishing that things happen on his terms. He said something to her. The people at the nearest tables heard it. The words themselves don't matter as much as the tone. Flat, quiet, the kind of tone that makes its point by refusing to acknowledge that the other person has any standing in the interaction. The tone of a man who considers the correction delivered and expects the matter to be closed. Carol Ann went still. The tray tilted. 3 glasses, 2 of them full, shifted. She tried to stabilize it one-handed while her other wrist was held. The tray lost the argument. The crash was small by the standards of the room. This wasn't a production number, just glass and ice and bourbon meeting carpet, but the sound cut through the ambient noise of a dinner crowd in a way that snapped heads around, including one head on stage. Dean Martin stopped singing, not dramatically, not with a gasp or a sweeping gesture toward the room. He simply stopped. The note he'd been holding closed cleanly, and for 2 full beats the band played on without him before Tommy Coletti's left hand registered the absence and eased the room into something quieter. The room, feeling the change the way rooms feel changes before they can name them, went quiet too. 412 people and a 12-piece band, all turning toward the same point. Dinter looked at Marcus, then at Carol Ann, then very slowly, at Marcus again. He took a sip of his whiskey. Now stop for a second, because what happens in the next 30 seconds requires you to understand something about Dean Martin that his public image often obscured. The easy smile, the bourbon, the half-lidded charm. People mistook that for softness, for a man who had decided that nothing was worth real engagement. That was the performance. The man underneath had grown up poor in Steubenville, Ohio, had worked doors and crap tables and every job that would have him before he found his way to a stage, and had spent 20 years in rooms full of difficult people, learning that the most powerful thing you could do was never let them see you react. What looked like indifference was actually absolute control, and control, deployed precisely, is the most devastating tool in any room. But what this story is really about, what took years to fully understand, is what the young woman standing at table 7 did with the rest of her life, because of the next 4 minutes. Dean took his time. He set his glass down on the monitor, at the edge of the stage. He adjusted the microphone stand. One small, deliberate click of his wrist. The stage lights caught the silver of the microphone, the white of his tuxedo shirt, the thin line of his smile. He looked at Marcus with the particular quality of attention that meant he wasn't scanning the room, wasn't performing for the crowd, was looking only at the man at table 7, and then he smiled. "Hey, pal," he said, and his voice through the PA was warm, conversational, completely at ease. "You got a minute?" The room didn't laugh yet. It was waiting. 400 people and a 12-piece band, all holding still, feeling what was about to happen without being able to name it. "I've been watching you over there," Dean continued, "and I gotta tell you, you're killing me." He shook his head slowly, the sympathetic headshake of a man who has seen all kinds of trouble in his time and has learned to be gentle about it, not because of the jacket. The jacket'll be fine, My dry cleaner could resurrect the Shroud of Turin. Don't even worry about it. That got the first laugh. Small, uncertain. People still calibrating what they were watching. A nervous laugh. The kind that means the crowd feels the weight of what's happening, but doesn't yet know which direction it's going to fall. "No, what's killing me?" Dean said, leaning forward on the microphone stand. With the ease of a man who has been doing this for 2 decades and knows exactly where his weight belongs, is that there's a beautiful girl standing right next to you. She just tried to do something nice for you, which between you and me happens to me less and less as the years go by, and you're sitting there like she owes you something. He paused. Now I've been married. I understand that feeling. But we're usually a few years in before it gets that bad. The room laughed. Properly this time, the way a room laughs when the tension has been given a shape, and that shape turns out to be something you can breathe around. The couples at the corner tables, the men at the bar, the studio people sitting with Clint, everyone exhaled into the joke the same way. Marcus's jaw tightened.
Oh.
Beside him, Clint Eastwood had gone very still. He had used 3 minutes of those 20. The band was vamping softly, holding the air open. Listen to what Dean was actually doing, because this is the part most people missed. He wasn't humiliating Marcus for sport. Every line was constructed to give Marcus an exit. The jacket'll be fine. We've all been married. The joke lands on the bourbon and the years. He was giving Marcus a way to laugh along, to become part of the show rather than the object of it. He was offering dignity to a man who had just taken some from someone who couldn't afford to lose it. Dean hadn't moved from his spot at center stage. He hadn't raised his voice. He looked at Carol Ann, who was standing near the overturned tray with her cloth napkin still in her hand, caught between the instinct to disappear and the strange fact of being held in a spotlight protected by it. "Sweetheart," Dean said, and he pitched it just right. Warm without condescension, seen without being made into a spectacle. You are doing a beautiful job. Don't let anybody tell you different. He held her gaze for a moment, a second, maybe 2, long enough for her to understand it was meant. Then he looked back at Marcus, including large men with expensive jackets, who apparently need both hands to manage a bourbon. The room laughed again. Alder, a woman 2 tables back, clapped once, short and involuntary, and that single clap landed like punctuation on everything. Marcus stood up. Not a slow, gathering himself to leave kind of stand. An up quickly stand. The kind that moves 340 pounds from seated to standing in a way that is its own statement. Someone's chair scraped the floor. A glass tilted and was steadied by a quick hand. The room felt the mass of him rising the way a room feels. A change in air pressure. He looked at the stage. "This got nothing to do with you," he said. "Not loud. Just flat and final. The tone of a man who believes the conversation is between him and the room, not between him and the performer." The room went very quiet. Hold this moment in your mind, because it's the hinge of everything. Dean Martin is on a stage 8 feet above the floor with a microphone, a 12-piece band, and 400 people. Marcus Dutton is standing at a table in the 3rd row with 340 pounds of certainty behind him. The distance between them is exactly the distance between 2 different understandings of what a room is for. What Marcus was going to do in the next 10 seconds was a question 400 people were holding without breathing. When Dean spoke, the warmth was still there, in his voice, but something underneath it had changed. Not gone, just settled, the way a fire settles when it decides it doesn't need to perform anymore. The smile on his face was the same smile. His eyes were something else. "You're right," he said. "It doesn't." He picked up his glass. The sound of it, the quiet clink of it against the monitor, carried in the silence. "But she's my waitress," he said, "it the way you say something that ends a conversation. Not loudly, not with emphasis, just cleanly, the way you close a door by pulling it all the way shut rather than slamming it. And this is my room." The silence stretched. This is where the story turns, and you need to hold both things at once. The man on stage, and the man standing at table 7. In that moment, Marcus Dutton was doing mathematics that had nothing to do with anything he'd learned in training or in the field. He was in a room with 400 people, a man on a stage with a microphone and a band, and 20 years behind him. If this escalated, it escalated in one direction only, toward his own diminishment, regardless of any physical outcome. Marcus knew how to fight. He did not know how to fight the geometry of this room. Clint's hand came down on Marcus's arm. Not a suggestion, a grip. He didn't look up. He looked at the table in front of him. "Sit down," he said. 2 words, no volume. The tone of a man who has already decided how this ends, and is simply waiting for the other person to reach the same conclusion. Marcus stood for 1 more second. Then he sat. The room exhaled. Not all at once. It came out in pieces, in the release of held breath and the resumption of small movements. Someone lifting a glass, someone else leaning back in their chair. The particular exhalation of 400 people who had been watching something they couldn't fully name and had now been given permission to breathe again. Dean set down his glass. He turned back to Tommy Coletti and said, without a microphone, just across the stage, simply from the top. Tommy's left hand found the opening chord without any visible thought, as natural as water finding level. The brass came in. Dean turned back to the room, adjusted the mic and picked up the song exactly where he'd left it. The same note, the same quality of breath, as if the last 2 minutes had been a planned break in the arrangement. The song had been sitting unfinished in the air for nearly 4 minutes. Now it was finished. The room erupted. Not the polite applause that greets a good song. The kind of applause that means something real happened, and people are grateful to have been there for it. People on their feet at tables, glasses raised. That particular exhilaration of a crowd that has just watched someone do something genuinely difficult, make it look like nothing at all. The brass section was grinning. Tommy Coletti's left hand kept the rhythm without adjustment, steady as a foundation. Carol Ann was still standing near table 7. A woman at the adjacent table touched her arm and said something quietly. Carol Ann nodded. She picked up her tray. She walked away from table 7 without looking at Marcus, moving through the crowd the way she always moved, like she was barely there, like the room was taking care of itself. Notice that she was smiling when she walked away. The rest of the show ran 90 minutes. Dean did 7 more songs, 2 encores, and a back and forth with Tommy Coletti that went on long enough that the trumpet player missed his re-entry cue and came in 2 bars late, which only made it better. The room never fully settled back into the relaxed pleasure of before. It was charged now, and Dean played to that without ever acknowledging what had generated it. At table 7, Clint Eastwood watched the remaining 90 minutes without drinking. Marcus sat beside him with his arms crossed, looking at the stage with the expression of a man replaying something he can't fit into any framework he owns. The studio men ordered dessert and made conversation about other things. Nobody mentioned what had happened. When the house lights came up, Clint stood, buttoned his jacket, and said to Marcus without looking at him, "Let's go." They left through the side exit. The parking structure was quiet and echoey, footsteps carrying further than they should. Clint didn't speak until they were a full level down from the showroom entrance. "You understand what happened in there?" he asked. Marcus walked a few more steps. "I know what happened. Tell me." The parking structure was cool. Somewhere above them, a car engine turned over. The sound rolled through the concrete levels. "He made it so there was nothing I could do," Marcus said. 400 people and a man with a microphone. Any move I made, I lose. He stopped walking. He knew that before he said the first word. Clint looked at him. "Yeah." He wasn't trying to embarrass me. No, he was trying to give me a way out. Yeah. Marcus stood there, both hands loose at his sides. He would have kept going, he said quietly. If I'd pushed it, he would have taken the room apart with you still in it, Clint said. And everybody there would have loved him for it, including you, eventually. He found his car key. That's what 20 years in a room looks like. They drove back to the hotel without talking. Power isn't about what you can do to someone. It's about what you can make them choose. Dean had understood that. Marcus, as of this evening, now understood it too. In the weeks that followed, the story traveled, not through newspapers but through the floor managers and maîtres d'hôtel and stagehands who moved between the hotels like information through water. By the end of October, most people who worked the strip seriously had heard some version of it. The versions varied the way all good stories vary. Some said Marcus had gotten to his feet twice. Some said Clint had physically put him back in his chair. One version had Dean raising a single finger to hold the band's note through the entire exchange like a musical threat. None of it was true. The truth was quieter, and in the way that real things often are, more unnerving than any dramatization. The core remained intact. A man with every physical advantage had been put back in his chair by a man with a microphone and a glass of whiskey. The room had loved the man with the microphone for it, and the sitting down had been inevitable from the moment Dean decided. Look at what Carol Ann carried out of the Desert Palace that night. Because here is where the second loop closes. Carol Ann Briggs worked at the Desert Palace for 4 more years. She moved to Reno in the late 60s, left the hospitality industry, opened a hair salon with her sister. By all accounts, she did well. She never spoke publicly about the night of October 4th, but she kept a photograph on the wall of her salon for the rest of her working life. Dean Martin on a stage. No inscription, no explanation. When regulars pushed, she'd say the same thing. Someone did something for me once. I like having him around. And she'd leave it at that. Marcus Dutton stayed with Clint through 1964 and left the security business the following year. He went back to Ohio, worked in construction management, raised a family. People who knew him in those years described a man different from the one at table 7, more patient with the space between what he could do and what he needed to do. He talked about this to his son-in-law once. At a kitchen table in Columbus, the son-in-law was going through a difficult situation at work. A boss using authority carelessly, making his life small in the grinding way. Marcus sat across from him at that kitchen table and told him the story of the night at the Desert Palace. All of it. The jacket, the bourbon, the tray, the wrist, the man on the stage who stopped singing. He offered me dignity first, Marcus said. That's the part I didn't understand until years later. He made a joke about his dry cleaner. He made a joke about marriage. He gave me a door, and all I had to do was take it. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I didn't take it, so he used what he had. And what he had was everything. The room, the band, the lights, 400 people who already liked him. He used all of it. But here's the thing. He paused. He wasn't happy about using it. I could see that. Even from where I was standing, I could see it. He wasn't enjoying what he was doing. His son-in-law asked what the difference was. Wasn't winning. He was willing to do it, Marcus said. He wasn't happy about it. That's the whole thing right there. A man who enjoys taking someone apart will do it whenever he can find a reason. A man who's willing to do it but doesn't want to. That's a different animal. That man only moves when he has to. Which means when he moves, you know it matters. He looked down at his coffee. I didn't understand that at the time. I understand it now. Wait, because the first loop hasn't closed yet. It closes somewhere else. That distinction, happy about it versus willing to, is the one worth carrying out of this room. Clint Eastwood continued working and became one of the most enduring figures in American cinema. He has spoken about Dean Martin over the years. always briefly. He has never told the story of the desert palace. Some events earn their privacy by being too real to survive being turned into content. Dean Martin finished the run 11 days later and drove back to Los Angeles. Television commitment. Recording session in December. More shows after the new year. The evening of October 4th was not something he mentioned. Not to Tommy Coletti, not to his manager, not to anyone who would have been delighted to have it as a story. He had been asked once, by a young performer struggling with a room that had turned against him, what you do when an audience decides it doesn't want what you're offering. Dean thought about it the way he thought about most things, that half-lidded ease, as if even a hard question was something he could make look effortless. "You don't manage them," he'd finally said. "You take care of whoever needs taking care of, and then you go back to the song." There it is. The answer to the question from the start. Not showmanship, not professionalism, something older than both. That's exactly what he'd done. He took care of what needed taking care of. Then he went back to the song. If you want to know what happened in that dressing room, 2 hours before Dean ever walked on that stage, there was a phone call that wasn't supposed to happen, and a door that stayed locked for 40 minutes. And what came out of that room before showtime is a different story entirely. Leave me a comment if you want to hear it. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think.